Well, good morning.
Morning.
It's great to see you guys here this morning. It's great for everyone to join us. We do have a number of exciting things coming up in the next weeks. Next Sunday school, we will be all together up here. We have Promotion Sunday. There's going to be some specials and some different things that the kids are doing as well. And because of that, we're not going to be live streaming. So next week, our Sunday school will just be live. There's unique ways that we have to work with music, and just because of some of that, we're not going to be able to live stream. So no live stream next week. Just here, we're going to do our Promotion Sunday, as I said, and some specials and things. So I would encourage you to come and join us for that. And then in our morning service, generally next week, in normal circumstances, we would be down at the wharf, and we would do our outdoor gospel service there. Well, due to everything, we are going to still have our gospel service, but it's going to be here in the morning, so it's going to be indoor-outdoor. Maybe we'll open some windows, and it'll feel like we're a little bit more outdoors. Depends on the weather. But that's what we're going to be doing. There'll be a few things that we're going to be doing different and special next week, so I would really encourage you to come through next weekend for our services. Then the following Sunday school, we will be starting up our regular classes. For the past little while, there's been an open session that they've done downstairs. Well, the first week in September, I think that's right, we'll begin our regular classes. So we have a number of teachers that are going to begin with all of our regular classes kind of taking off the following week. So we're excited about these kinds of things. We're just kind of getting things back going, and Kids Club is going to be starting soon. Our Sunday schools are returning, and as they were before. So we're excited about these things. This morning, we're going to turn our attention once again to the book of Proverbs. While they're getting started with something new, we're going to be sticking with Proverbs. There's still a great deal for us to cover, and then we have a completely different study that we'll be jumping into after Proverbs. But we're working our way through emotions, and this morning is the last of the topics under the category of emotions. So the topical study from the book of Wisdom, Proverbs, under emotions, and we left off last week talking about shame. We just tackled a few of the verses about it. Chapters 3:35, just by way of review, and I'm moving through my slides here until we get to shame here. The wise shall inherit glory, but shame shall be the promotion of fools. A fool is basically a person who has turned their back on God, and so it is a very strong word in the Bible, and the best that a fool can hope for is shame. And so that was the very first introduction that we had to it. And then 6:32 through 33 introduces a different kind of aspect to shame. Whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. He that doeth it destroyeth his own soul. A wound and dishonor shall he get, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. So the dishonor there is the same word for shame. So they just use those almost interchangeably at times to represent that Hebrew word. Shame, from that verse and from others in Proverbs, we get the idea that shame is a term that comes from the word for standing or reputation. So that's kind of the family of words that it comes from. A similar word would be used to talk about the reputation that you have. Shame is kind of the negative side of a reputation. And so having done something that destroys your reputation, that causes public disgrace, it decreases your standing or reputation. So shame is the internal feeling that comes with being disgraced or feeling like you're of the lowest quality. That's the essence of shame, the word that Proverbs uses there. So we're talking about not a visible thing, something that you can do something that causes shame, and that can have outward results as well, and physical results, but shame is that internal feeling. When you have completely fallen or failed or done something horrendous, you feel disgraced, and shame is that feeling that that changes how you think. Shame modifies your thinking and decreases your standing in your own mind. It makes you think that you are of a lower quality, which is why in that verse that talks about adultery, why it says it's something that sticks with you. Because it's very hard to get over shame. Because it changes how you think. It rearranges things in your mind. So you think you have a reputation up here and you may be going along and thinking everything is fine. Well, then you do something that causes shame. And in your own mind, all of a sudden you go from, okay, we're dealing with things, and all of a sudden your own view of yourself drops. And you now, instead of like, okay, we can deal with things, are now like, wow, I'm down here. I'm the lowest that there is. That's what shame is. It rewires how you think of yourself. That's why it's so damaging, and that's why it's so hard to get over. It's not something that is easily dealt with. There we go. There's the next one on my notes. Shame changes how you think of yourself, and it is very difficult to overcome. Once your brain has been rewired, you can't just pop the hood and, change the wires around. It takes a long time. In order to move past those things and deal with shame, that's why the forgiveness of God is so important. Because God's the one that can help with that rewiring, that can take away sin, that can offer forgiveness. It is part of what God offers in salvation to help with how you think of yourself by offering forgiveness, so that you can move past shame, and He can rewire your mind by continually helping you to understand the reality of how much He loves you, how much He has forgiven you, to be able to help you to move on. So shame is a very difficult thing to deal with because it is a rewiring in your mind. So it's very difficult to leave behind, especially the biggest shame causers. When you really fall flat on your face and you make big mistakes that change your reputation drastically, that shame, it's very hard to move past. We see that in that verse there. Adultery is one of those things. Now, in that same discussion, leaving here, departing from our verses just momentarily into a side trail, now imagine, as we were talking last week, imagine that we live in a world where this is true, and we know it is, and sin, failures, those kinds of things, they cause shame. But now imagine that the world would like to pretend that they don't. Imagine that we live in a world that has changed and wants to change the definition of what's right and wrong. And so we've redefined everything, but the very fact of the matter is that sin and failure and those kinds of different things, this kind of failure, still causes shame. So the world has redefined things and says, oh no, that's not a big deal, but still, when you commit those things, it's still a big deal, it still rewires things. So now, people still commit sin, shame still happens, but now we deny it. We deny that it's wrong. We try to move past it. And so now, instead of dealing with shame by coming to Christ and experiencing His forgiveness, now the world pretends like it doesn't exist. And so now we just walk around with our brains rewired. And it either makes people feel like they're worth 2 cents, or it makes people lash out in anger because they feel wrong. They feel shame. They know they've done something wrong, but they're refusing to deal with it, or they're refusing to call it what it is. And that's the world that we live in. That way makes all the sense in the world why there are so many issues. If you're dealing with shame, but you refuse to acknowledge that you've done anything wrong, even though your brain still is wired to, I've done something wrong, I feel shame, then it just gets worse and worse. So eventually you're going to start to exhibit issues and problems because your brain's rewired, you're not dealing with it, there's no forgiveness, and so it just festers and it works at you. And those are the two opposite far ends of the spectrum with anything happening in between. Either a person walks around feeling like they're worth 2 cents, or they walk around angry at everything because there's something wrong, but they're not dealing with it, they're not facing it. So you have the two ends of the spectrum, and it can be anything in the middle and on the whole spectrum there anyways. And that's what's going on in the world. Shame messes with your mind. And if you don't acknowledge it, deal with it by coming to Christ and getting forgiveness and having Him work on you to move past those things, it just ruins you. It completely messes with your mind because it has rewired things that only God can fix. So there's a big problem in our world with shame because sin is still sin, whether they call it sin or not. And it's still wrong. You still feel shame whether they want to acknowledge that it's wrong or not. So it's a big, big problem. Proverbs 13 and verse 18 is the next verse here as we continue on. Sorry for that little rabbit trail, but it's just shame is a difficult thing to work with. Proverbs 13:18 says, "Poverty and shame shall be to him that refuseth instruction, but he that regardeth reproof shall be honored." Just as shame follows on with pride, so shame goes hand in hand with arrogance. If you refuse to be instructed, if you refuse to take positive instruction or any instruction whatsoever, you refuse to think that there's anybody that could teach you anything, if there's a pride and an arrogance in you, then it's not going to be very much longer where shame is going to come into your life. Where things are going to happen and you're going to fall, shame's going to be in there. So just as shame follows pride, in the same way, shame goes hand in hand with arrogance. And then Proverbs 18 and verse 3. And again, if you have questions or comments, just raise your hand. And if you're following along with us live streamed or later on, you can always post on our Facebook page and or send me a message as well, and we can answer those questions. But if you have a question here, just please pop up your hands. Proverbs 18 and verse 3. "When the wicked cometh, then cometh also contempt, and with ignominy reproach." Now, there's a lot of words in there that we don't use at all. I don't know of anybody who talks about ignominy. I looked it up just so that I knew exactly what it was. Perhaps some of you are very familiar with the word. It's not one that I use very often. Ignominy is another word for shame. Now, why they couldn't have just put shame in there, but ignominy it carries weight to it, I suppose. Following shame is disrespect. So ignominy is another word for shame. With ignominy follows reproach. So the idea that he's getting across in the verse is when wickedness comes, then there will also be contempt. There will be a disrespect for others, a looking down on others. And then following along with shame, is that reproach. So when a person feels shame, their respect for others diminishes. And all of these things kind of work together. When shame exists, your respect for others will also diminish. When you do something, when you are wicked, following along with that is shame and a disrespect. So all three of those things kind of work together. When a person feels shame, their respect for others will diminish because shame has rewired things. Remember what we said at the beginning. It makes you feel less. So when you feel less, you either just throw yourself on the ground, oh, I'm 2 cents, everybody else, woe is me. Or the other side of the spectrum, you begin to disrespect others. You feel like you need to diminish others because you feel diminished. There's something wrong with you where you feel like there's shame on you, and so it weighs you down. As a result, you want to push other people down. So with shame naturally comes a disrespect for others. When the wicked cometh, then cometh also contempt, and with ignominy reproach. That's the idea here. These things work together. When shame is caused, it can often affect how you view others. So it modifies how you think of yourself. It has an impact on how you think of yourself, but it also can have an impact on how you think of others. Next verse is in Proverbs 25. This is a unique set of verses in Proverbs 25, verses 8 through 10. These three verses talk about a unique topic here. So Proverbs 25 in verse 8, or beginning in verse 8, "Go not forth hastily to strive, lest thou know not what to do in the end thereof, when thy neighbor hath put thee to shame. Debate thy cause with thy neighbor himself, discover not a secret to another, lest he that heareth it put thee to shame, and thine infamy turn not away." Proverbs gives us advice on a lot of different things, and very real-to-life things. So the situation is that an offense has been committed. You feel like an offense has been committed against you. A big one, for instance. The idea here and the wisdom that is being imparted is that we should not rush to take someone to court. So you feel like you have been aggrieved and it's a substantial thing, and immediately you rush to take them to court and as to make this right, and I'm going to take them to the law and they're going to get it right. Well, don't rush to take someone to court. The wisdom is it's better to try to handle grievances privately without letting the whole world know. So something has been done, something wrong. Our first knee-jerk response shouldn't be, get it right, take him to court. Our first response should be to try to handle that grievance privately. And this is something between two people here. So the first kind of wisdom is to first debate thy cause with thy neighbor himself. So you go to them and try to work things out there. What you should not do is discover the secret to everyone else. So something has happened between two people. First you go and talk to them. What you don't do is spread it around to everybody else. So as soon as something happens to you, you go to the other neighbor. Did you hear what happened? I am so offended. I think I'm going to take action. Don't do that. Because in the last part of the verse, it may be that the person who hears it, the other neighbor, may know more of the whole story. And as you try to make this big deal, that other person may say, you're wrong. That's not how things went down. They may discover and cause you shame because you didn't take the time to go to your neighbor to find out what went on and to solve the situation that way. So an offense was made, and you, without trying to figure out exactly what went on, immediately rush and make this whole thing public, and you blow up and take it to court, and whereas somebody else might come in afterwards and say, actually, you're wrong. And it will cause you shame because you didn't take the time to go to that person to figure out and get all the details and all of the facts. What went on? What's going on? Can we work this out? But you just jumped immediately to the blowing up phase without the trying to work it out phase. So in order to prevent shame coming on you, don't be so hasty. That's the basic principle. And he's using this illustration. Don't rush to take someone to court. Take time. Be patient. Try to work things out. There is a time for court. Okay, that's why there's a system for that in place. There was in New Testament and Old Testament times. But the advice, the wisdom is, be patient. Listen to all sides. Don't blow up. And if it's a serious issue, don't go gossiping about it to everybody. Be patient. Find everything out. If it's necessary, then you take those steps, but don't rush. Skip over things, because that may come back later and cause you shame because you blew up but didn't find out what was going on. So don't rush. Be patient. You will stop yourself from enduring shame if you take a moment. Almost breathe, for instance. Darren.
I think a classic example of this in modern day now would be with the media showing small snippets of videos that someone's taken, making a headline out of it because they have to, because it's a 24-hour-a-day news cycle and they need a headline, and then the full facts of the video come out and it's totally out of context. It happens all the time.
It's more evident in our society now because we see it happen quicker, but that kind of thing that happens in the media and often happens in the news has been happening forever. People get a few pieces of the story and then, oh, this is what happened, and everything blows up. But then as all of the facts come out, it's like, oh, well, maybe I should not have blown up.
But yet there's no shame with the media.
There still is.
Yes,
but it's ignored and it's
acknowledged.
Not acknowledged. It's, you just deal with it. There are, let's not go into that. I have opinions about things that I won't go into. But this happens often. So when you see something, when you interact with something, that principle that is being talked about applies to all things. If you see a snippet of a video clip and your blood boils, rein it in, hold back the anger until you actually figure out what's going on. And if it's necessary to take action, then it's necessary, but make sure you hear the whole story. Make sure you understand what's going on. If not, shame comes. Somebody else may prove you wrong. The next one is Proverbs 10 in verse 5. And we're going back because it's a slightly different approach to shame now. So Proverbs 10 and verse 5. He that gathereth in summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causeth shame. Laziness causes shame for more than just one person. The other big principle with shame is that it doesn't just affect you. It has an effect on those around you. In this instance, a son is very lazy. When he should be out working, he's not. Well, the shame of that laziness is reflected on his parents and his family just as much as it is reflected on him. Shame for things that you have done can have an impact and cause shame in others as well. So that's a big principle. We have a few verses that I'd like to get through in the last remaining minutes here, so we're going to try to move through these quickly because next week we won't be in Proverbs. Proverbs 14, 34 and 35. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. The king's favor is toward a wise servant, but his wrath is against him that causeth shame. Sin, epic failure in sin, is a disgrace to a nation as well as to people. When something becomes commonplace that is wrong, it affects a nation as well. So when the country that you are in is consistently doing sin and is okay with that sin, there is a disgrace and shame that comes on everybody that is in that nation. That's why some of the Old Testament prophets, though they had not done some of the sin, said, "We have done this great wickedness against you. Many of the different prophets cried out as if they themselves had done the shame and had done the sin, because that's the way that it works. When you are living in a nation which is okay with sin and that becomes a part of it, there is a shame that comes with that, a disgrace. Tied in with that is a little principle that pride-filled and selfish people should be shunned by leadership. If you have a leadership position, do not boost or give place to pride-filled and selfish people. As leaders, that's something that is not worth praising, that is not worth promoting. Pride-filled, selfish people, because they bring shame. Proverbs 17:2. A wise servant shall have rule over a son that causeth shame, and shall have part of the inheritance among the brethren. Now, this is a verse that we have dealt with before, but it's the similar idea. Pride-filled and selfish children will never do as well as a wise person. So this is, in essence, like a family business, and the father, or just in this time, the father would pass on his inheritance to his children. Well, prideful and selfish child will do worse than a wise person, even if they have an inheritance to come into and the wise person has nothing to come into. At the end of life, one will do better than the other. Pride-filled and selfish people will naturally end up in the wrong place, whereas a wise person will find more success. And that's the real kind of valuable, self-affirming, good life success, not just doing things and having things. Proverbs 19:26. We have just a few verses left, just 3. Proverbs 19:26. He that wasteth his father and chaseth away his mother is a son that causeth shame and bringeth reproach. A child who mistreats and throws out his parents only causes shame. The idea and what happened often in the culture is the family might have like a compound of buildings. And when the son married, he would often build onto and then move into there. And when his father passed away, he would move into the main house. And that's the way that it would often take place. Well, in this point, it's a shameful son who throws out his dad, mistreats his parents, and moves into the big house and just kicks them out onto the street. That brings reproach and it causes shame. A child who mistreats and throws out their parents out of that's the kind of cultural situation there. It is a tremendously shameful thing for a child to mistreat their parents. And when they are in need, to just toss them out. Now, there's so many other different things going on with a parent and a child relationship, but this is one of the principles. It will bring shame on a person who mistreats their parents. It is a shameful thing. Then one more verse as we finish up Proverbs 29 and verse 15. And this one flies in the face of a lot of parenting ideas today. Proverbs 29:15. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame. The rod is corporal punishment, and reproof is verbal correction. There's a place for both. And it is a wise parent that knows when to apply both. An undisciplined child will cause the parents shame. So if you have it in your mind that a child should be left to themselves to raise themselves and think for themselves, you're the one that will pay for that later. Now, it will backfire for your children as well, because they're not going to have the ability to live life, make proper decisions, and do things either. There is shame that will come on them, but your lack of parenting will bring shame on you later. Parent now, parent God's way, and there is less shame. But when we don't correct and discipline, you, parents, are the ones who have to deal with that shame. Questions or comments as we finish? The last slide that I put up here all the time, that is a part of every one of the PowerPoints, the aim of the book of Proverbs is to help us acquire and apply God's wisdom to the decisions and activities of daily life. The book of Proverbs is one of the most wonderful example of how much God loves us. Because he's not just interested in heaven and the big picture stuff, but he is interested in how you interact and how you do life every single day. And so he has given us a book that is full of wisdom to help us make godly decisions and to live life in a way that honors him and that is absolutely successful in the best ways. In business, in life, in your relationships, and with your family. God loves you so much that he gives us wisdom and pearls of knowledge for every facet. It showcases the love of God for us. Very thankful for the book of Proverbs. Let's finish up with a word of prayer this morning. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for all that you have done for us. We thank you for the book of Proverbs that we have, that we can come to and spend time looking over these things so that we can live lives, make wise decisions, and honor you in everything that we do. So we thank you once again. In your name, amen.